Hello and welcome to another Clean Energy Shorts brief chats with power leaders. I'm really excited today because we're talking with my first Brainiac academic. This is assistant professor in communications at Clemson University, one of the top universities in the country, Brandon Boatwright, and he just came out with a phenomenal report with a team of other smarties at Clemson University about messaging when it comes to clean energy, particularly this was focused on electric vehicles in the Southeast. Brandon, I'm not even going to attempt to say that really long title of your academic report because it's a long. So can you give us the title and tell us what prompted this study and what were the takeaways?
Yeah, so I mean, big picture with the study is, and all shout out to my co-authors, Carlina DeRusso and Amel Kabir and Thea Hagen, who are just absolutely phenomenal researchers and scholars from the communication department at the university and in environmental science. And the study came about by virtue of just an interdisciplinary research collaboration that we have exploring social media data analytics. Dr. Hagen is a faculty member who is involved in environmental conservation research and is a rock star in that field. She was a faculty fellow in our social media listening center on campus. And one of the ideas that kind of came from that collaboration was, the industry of electric vehicles is massive, and we're starting to see a greater adoption across the country. But one of the places where it lagged behind was in the southeastern United States. And that's coincidentally where Clemson University is. And obviously we live in this space. We know the area and we see the vehicles that are on the roads or not, as the case may be.
Right.
And we were just kind of curious, like there's so much money and infrastructure being poured into EVs in the southeastern United States. And historically, the region had lagged behind. And so that's kind of where the impetus for the study originated.
So what did you go into the study thinking you're going to find out? And then what did you really find out?
So when you go into a study where you're analyzing like big data sets with social media, you don't really know, right? It's a lot of what we call unstructured data, where there is not a lot of coherent linearity in terms of like input A, output B. So we kind of go into it with an open mind of how do we collect the data, one, because there's a very intentional element to that. What we had to do was we pulled 3 years of historical data on X, formerly Twitter, and we pulled 3 years of historical data on that platform only from users who identified themselves as being from the Southeast from a regional perspective. So we pulled content from people in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Virginia, Kentucky, all across the Southeast United States. And we only looked for people who had mentioned, electric vehicles, EVs, any other kind of terminology that might be related or associated with, that technology. And we ran a couple of computational techniques, essentially. One is called topic modeling, where we analyze, that unstructured data and try to understand what are the prominent themes that people are discussing in relation to those conversations. And one of the things, the most obvious and pressing thing that we found is that when we're talking about electric vehicles in the southeastern United States, the sentiment around the environmental impact is overall negative, right? I mean, there is not as much of a positive messaging around the environmental impact as there is economic impact. And so when we analyze the conversations where people were talking about, hey, the EV industry is actually doing wonders for my local community, for my hometown, because of the investment that's happening in these technologies, then there's a much more positive sentiment, right? And surprisingly, that sentiment, have picked up over time. So over that 3-year period, we saw more steady increases in positive sentiment when you look at the economic impact that EVs are having across the region. But ultimately, we've just found that it comes down to a marketing strategy, right? That, certain messages are not resonating in certain parts of the country where, like conversation around the environmental impact is not as prominent or does not feature as strongly, we'll say, as economic conversations do.
So you didn't mention Elon,
Hmm.
which was probably a good thing, but you did mention in the report Tesla.
Yep.
Tesla's doing something right. Talk about that.
Yeah. So when we talk about brands and products, Tesla has really cornered the market in terms of high value products in the EV space. And, there may be an alignment that we haven't really tested or teased out to say, like, that Tesla is a popular EV brand in the southeastern United States. I mean, it would be interesting for us to, in a future study, potentially look at what do certain models of electric vehicles produced by Ford, Chevy, more domestic manufacturers compare with Tesla, compare with more international manufacturers, right? Like that might be an interesting thing for us to look at in the future. But Tesla has done a really great job of kind of marketing all aspects of the brand and not necessarily focusing on the environmental impact per se, but on focusing on performance and luxury and the types of things that people, quite honestly, who could afford to buy a Tesla are going to be excited about looking at those types of things, right? You want a car that's going to outperform and perform well. You want a car that's going to look well. It's going to be, a potential status symbol. It's not entirely surprising to see that conversation around the Tesla brand resonated more given what we learned about this audience in the southeastern United States and how electric vehicles resonate or don't.
We got a lot of people in the Southeast where they love their big trucks. How should you pivot your marketing so that the next time that person from the Southeast is looking to shop, to buy a new vehicle,
Sure.
why would they think of getting an EV truck as opposed to the same truck or a bigger truck?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it boils down to performance, and I think it boils down to cost efficacy. I think a lot of people tend to associate electric vehicles as being out of reach, as being potentially out of touch. There's that kind of perception of it, and if it's associated with climate messaging and that sort of thing, oftentimes people discount it as being an elitist type of thing, right? Regardless of political, ideological kind of spectrum, that's the default that people kind of tend to gravitate towards.
Right.
But the companies that do well, who are marketing eco-friendly and sustainable energy practices, are the ones that are kind of working both sides of the camp. Energy can be efficient and it can be productive and it can be powerful. And quite honestly, with EVs, good looking and strong, all the things that we want to see while being clean. And so I think that from a marketing standpoint, this seems like an Occam's razor type of situation. Sometimes the simplest solution really is the easiest solution, or the best solution is the easiest solution. And quite honestly, it boils down to marketing the performance and the economic impact of these products.
I'm going to put you on the spot. When I read the report, I was kind of hoping there would be pullout quotes from X. And of course, I was looking for a goofy one about making fun of Cybertrucks or something. When you're going through the reams and reams of data, were there any posts that really stuck out for you in any
Yeah,
way?
I mean, there's always the like odd conspiratorial posts that tend to come out of like clean energy is doing X, Y, and Z, and you look at those and you get a sense of like, okay, yeah, like this messaging is out there. And from a marketing perspective, right, like it's important to know that the kind of stuff is there.
Yeah.
And that those messages are existing. But one of the things that in doing any social media research nowadays, you have to understand that there are bots and other accounts that are out there that are amplifying those messages and making them seem like they're more consequential than they really are. And that's especially important when really 1% of internet users are or of social media users are actually people who are creating content. And so when you think about 1% of people who have active X accounts or Instagram or Facebook are people who are actually creating content, that means that 1% is setting the direction for the 99% of us who are just scrolling or liking or that sort of thing.
Wow.
And so when that's
The
being
one
affected
percenters are so
by,
cool.
yeah, exactly. When that's being affected by, um, inauthentic accounts or bots or spam or honestly even generative AI now, when we see more and more of that, it creates a distortion effect, so to speak. For marketers, we have to pay attention, like what is real and what's resonating and what may be just false red flags.
Right. So what were some of the red flags or conspiracies that you were seeing with the EVs?
Oh, EVs being linked with 5G technology and like interfering with health outcomes and adverse effects, like that electric vehicles are actually adversarial to the environment. So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff out there that, um, again, if you just take a few minutes to fact check, you'll quickly kind of find out these are not real things. But a lot of people don't do that, and especially if you're just casually scrolling.
Right. So that might be something marketers want to either directly or indirectly address head on.
Well, and it factors into their communication plans, right? I'm not saying that marketers have to, in the fine print, say electric vehicles not associated with 5G. What are some of the ways that you can kind of creatively push back where you can against misinformation and disinformation around products and brands, especially those that are, you know, just trying to do the work of making our world a little bit more sustainable.
Right. I was wondering when I was reading the report, I was really looking at this from a marketing perspective. When you're trying to figure out your marketing message, you do a customer journey map and you try to profile who is that targeted customer. After going through years and years of those Twitter X posts, who was the amalgam, the person who was commenting on
Yeah,
EV vehicles in the Southeast?
yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, that's not something that we really looked into a ton with regard to this study. You know, we were primarily looking at just the language that the users were incorporating and not as much like, what does their profile picture look like? What's included in their Twitter bio? Now, there is room for that research and there are opportunities for doing that work because platforms that we utilize for data collection, like I could search someone's Twitter bio and then figure out what are they saying about electric vehicles, right? Like if I wanted to find someone who says that they live in the Charlotte metropolitan area, I can search things related to Charlotte and association with electric vehicles and see what they're saying about that. So there's different ways of segmenting audiences, but ultimately it boils down to how you structure your searches more so than analyzing differences in platforms across big data sets or differences in users across big data sets, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So if you were somebody going, wow, I'm a marketer and I picked up this brilliant research paper, what advice might you have for SEOs? What words would
Yeah.
you recommend?
Yeah, and I think that's the value of social media listening in general
Yeah.
is that, beyond surveys and focus groups and interviews, social media data provides you with a very raw and unfiltered glance at what people are saying and what they're thinking. For better or worse, you get the raw, unfiltered content. And through that, not only do you kind of have to parse through the noise and the cacophony of what social media is, but you also get insightful moments where you learn that, if we focus our attention on certain words or phrases that is being used by our target audience in these areas, then maybe we adapt a more holistic marketing strategy or message design strategy that doesn't necessarily take a blanket approach, right, to marketing to everyone across the United States because we're all, in different areas where there's different socioeconomic factors, political factors, all these things at play. I don't think that it's safe for any marketer at this point to assume that a blanket approach is going to work well. There's just going to there has to be more nuance. There has to be more intentionality behind understanding your audiences especially for a national brand who's operating across the country and even internationally, to understand who you're speaking to and how they're speaking.
You're teaching students to become professional social media folks. And you know very well and good that corporate America, people who hire social media folks, they underestimate what knowledge they bring to the table and just how labor intensive it is.
Sure.
So I'm hearing you say that this would be great, right? Everybody should be checking the language and working closely with their social media professionals to mine that data to help form the messaging. How time intensive is this? What are the
Yeah.
expectations that that should be put upon your social media professional team, right? When it comes to this.
Yeah. Well, so as far as time investment goes, I mean, I think of it as a learning curve, right? Like there is a kind of a steep learning curve of when we're training students to learn how to leverage these technologies for social listening. We teach them in a way that's kind of agnostic to like any one particular tool or platform, because the core principles of critical thinking, asking curious questions about like, okay, if we want to find out what people in the southeastern United States are saying about electric vehicles, how do we go about doing that? Like what are the practical steps that we need to do in order to take on that challenge? But beyond, just orienting, search platforms to point in the right direction and to collect the right amount of data, we also have to be able to teach them how to interpret that for actionable insights.
Right.
Because it's one thing to turn them loose and say, go pull 3 years of data, but it's another thing entirely to say, tell me what it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think the time intensive element comes in. But that's, and the important piece is that's where the insights come in. That's where the rich information and the context comes from. But, the best social media integrations and the best social listening integrations happen when it factors into a much more holistic marketing platform. Social
Yeah.
media intelligence is I will say, as someone who studies it and teaches it and kind of lives it day in and day out, social media intelligence is vital. Regardless of how much money you have to do surveys and focus groups and that sort of thing, people who participate in those may tell you one thing and then go on social media and say something totally different. We have to use it as a point of triangulation, right? To say, okay, our survey data say this, but the sentiment on social media says something totally different. How do we
Right.
account for those differences? And so I will sing the praises of my students, of people who are working in social media, um, to say like these are critical roles that organizations, if they don't have them, are leaving a lot on the table.
Well, yeah, and I think all too often they just think it's like posting on my Instagram site, right? It's just pushing out
Sure.
content. I don't think they
Yeah.
understand and appreciate the value, and I think that really came through with this report. The value of the input that's out there.
Right. I teach social media strategy courses as well. And some of the things that we talk about is that the posts that organizations make, I think the average user sees the end result. When you're scrolling on your phone and you scroll past content from a clean energy company, yes, you'll see that and you'll respond to it. It'll resonate with you in some respects, but there is a strategic element behind every post, or there should be a strategic element behind every post that is made. And by and large, we understand and we develop those strategies through processes of social listening.
Yeah. Well, last question, and this is a standard question. What
Sure.
excites you? What is exciting you about clean energy and social media right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're at such an inflection point in both. There's so much positive momentum and infrastructure that's being designed to support clean energy, while at the same time, social media is being polluted with things like generative AI and false information and nefarious actors and things along those lines. So, when we talk about policies and programs that are enacted to support clean energy or debates around clean energy, it's important to be able to still utilize social media to gather the pulse of the public, with regard to what's going to resonate and what's not, how messaging might work with certain audiences and what won't. But at the same time, it's important for us to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? To know that this content is being generated by authentic users who may have influence over what other users think, feel, say, and do. And so the thing that excites me the most is that there's such incredible progress toward clean energy initiatives and momentum in that space. And there's so much potential in utilizing social media to advance those efforts.
That's great. Assistant Professor Brandon Boatwright, thank you so much. And we look forward to your next report. And hopefully you'll join us again for some insights.
I absolutely would love to. Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you.